All right, so Universal has a new Mummy movie coming out, which is the start of their own cinematic universe containing all the classic Universal monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, maybe Creature of the Black Lagoon, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is being called the Dark Universe. I'm not quite sure what that title implies, but it's something that I'm quite curious and excited to see play out. Since The Mummy's the first one to start it off, I figured what better opportunity is there to review the Mummy movies than now. We're going to start things off with the original 1932 Mummy starring Boris Karloff. The movie follows a group of people that discover a mummy, and they find out that the name is Imhotep. Through a little bit of foolishness, let's just say, the mummy has now awakened and is now roaming the earth. But his purpose is to try and resurrect his mummy girlfriend through what he believes to be her modern day equivalent. So the very generic mainstream depiction of a mummy is usually a guy wrapped in some toilet paper or bandages, slowly walking around like a zombie and killing you with his bare hands. It's sort of like the prototype for what Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees would end up becoming. That slow killer that no matter how fast you run and no matter how slow they move, eventually they're going to catch up to you and kill you. So it's a common image that people think of whenever they hear the words mummy. But I imagine that a lot of younger people watching this one for the first time might be a little surprised to figure out that depiction of the mummy actually never makes that much of an appearance. It's a more unique movie than some people would think, given all of the pop culture history with the mummy. And there are two elements in this that really help. One is the story. All the mummy really wants to do is just resurrect his mummy girlfriend so they can be together. That's his main agenda, and he'll go to great lengths to ensure that happens. And the other aspect of this that helps is the guy who's playing the mummy, Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff is mainly known for playing the Frankenstein monster in 1931's Frankenstein. But this is the first movie where he really gets to show off how charismatic he can be. Yes, he's playing another monster, but the mummy doesn't go around wrapped in bandages, slowly walking. Instead, he just walks around posing as a modern-day Egyptian under the name Ardith Bey. And the only time you ever see Boris Karloff wrapped in bandages is when they find him in the sarcophagus, where he's just sleeping until he's resurrected, which is actually the best scene in the whole movie, the resurrection scene. It's a very simple scene, but it manages to be incredibly creepy, working with as little as possible, because this is a movie that came out when sound movies were still a new thing. So this scene practically has no sound at all, and it takes its time really slowly for the mummy to awaken. And when he wakes up, you don't see him walk. You just see his hand take away the scroll, and the guy who accidentally resurrects the mummy sees him as the mummy's off camera, screams, and then goes into this maniacal, crazy laugh that works. And all you see of the mummy leaving the building are two bandages just kind of dragging across the floor as this guy, who's played by Bramwell Fletcher, is losing his mind because he just saw someone come back from the dead. I'm sure for younger people it might not work too well because, again, this is 1932. It wasn't until 1933's King Kong where sound movies really jumped into high gear, because that movie took advantage of sound as much as it could, from sound effects to music, whereas the earlier Universal monster movies like Dracula and Frankenstein from 1931 were very slow and often quiet movies. And The Mummy is very much the same way. It moves at a very slow pace, but it's never boring for me. And one advantage to this movie's slow pace is that it's only an hour and 13 minutes long. So it's a very short movie, but it just feels like it might be an hour and a half. The slow pace, as well as the cinematography, and basically just the way it's filmed, adds to the creepy tone of this movie. I also really love the makeup job on Boris Karloff. When he's going around posing as a modern-day Egyptian, all you see are wrinkles, but it gives you the impression that this is a guy who's been dead for thousands of years and that he's still a corpse, even though he's walking among people. All the wrinkles give you the impression that his skin is very dry and that if you just slap him, he would crumble easily. And the makeup is done by Jack Pierce, who's pretty much the Rick Baker of the Universal Monsters, because he's responsible for the iconic looks of both Frankenstein and the Wolfman. So this guy is pretty much the original monster maker. Are there any problems with The Mummy? Well, as I mentioned, it does move at a very slow pace, and there are a few awkward moments where there is no sound at all. But again, you have to take into consideration that this was a movie made during a time when sound movies were still a new thing. Again, it wasn't until King Kong broke new ground that sound movies really kicked into high gear. The rest of the actors are good, but nobody ever holds a candle to Boris Karloff, who commands this whole movie. The only one who comes close is Edward Van Sloan, who's playing a character very similar to the one that he played in Dracula, where he's a scientist who figures out that this guy is actually a monster. Everyone else is just kind of forgettable, but they serve their roles well. There isn't much else to say about this movie. I think Dracula and Frankenstein are better Universal monster movies, but The Mummy is really unique in the sense that it wasn't based off a book like those two movies, and there was actually never a sequel to this movie. In the 40s, there were more mummy movies, but they were kind of reboots and focused on a different mummy. This one, with the original Imhotep mummy, stood alone, never had a sequel, and that's one thing that really makes it unique. So I would say that this original Mummy is worth seeing in your lifetime. If you're a big film history buff, then this is pretty much a requirement to watch because it is one of the most iconic monsters out there. And it's very simple. It's also very straight to the point. It may move at a slow pace, but it opens with them finding the mummy and it ends as soon as the mummy's destroyed. So it gets in and out quickly. So that's my review for the original 1932 Mummy. Now, unfortunately, I won't be able to review the other classic Universal Mummy movies because there are more Mummy movies than there are weeks before the new one comes out, which is, again, another good reason why this one is a complete standalone. So maybe one day I'll touch upon the other Universal Mummy movies, but for next week, we're going to talk about the 1999 remake starring Brendan Fraser. I think it's a good idea to just jump into that series just so we can get an idea and a reminder of what the last Mummy series was like. And I do have quite a lot to say about those movies. So until next week, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.